Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
Today I talk with a gifted Canadian musician. He is a guitarist, producer, composer, songwriter, and engineer. He's collaborated with several renowned musicians, Canadian singer and songwriter Jann Arden, MC5 guitarist Wayne Kramer, country artist Jason McCoy, British hit songwriter Martin Page, and many notable other names. He was also musical director for the North American tour of the Queen musical We Will Rock You, winner of several musical awards and accolades. My guest today is Russell Broom, who joins Your Take to discuss growing up in Alberta, Canada, discovering music for the first time, musical collaborations, and his experiences working in the music industry across several areas. Thank you kindly for joining us today on Your Take. A great pleasure to have you. Thank you kindly.
Thank you very much.
How are you? You well?
I'm doing really well. Yeah, thanks. I've been lucky to be busy during this whole global pandemic, and I'm very thankful for that. But as the world is opening up, sure, and my phone starts ringing off the hook a lot more for live shows, I'm kind of burnt out, and everyone's really excited. So I'm just trying to navigate all of that right now. But yeah, I'm thankful to be healthy, and that my family's good, and work is really enjoyable, and yeah, I have no real complaints.
Okay, so with Your Take, we tried to kind of create a narrative on your life, your career, and your achievements, obviously mentioned from the brief introduction. But to start with, we go back to the very beginnings, humble beginnings in Alberta, Canada. I kind of just want to ask you when you were born and just a little bit about life growing up, and at what age did you discover music?
Well, it's funny. I was actually born in Hull, so I'm from the UK.
Okay.
And my family, my immediate family emigrated when I was 3, and we came to Canada. But the rest of my extended family are still in the north of England. But my father was a ship's engineer, and then eventually he got into the oil business. And Alberta is quite a hub for the oil business. And we moved here in the mid 70s. And to be honest, Calgary is a fairly, it's a city of 1 million people now, but it's still a little bit remote. It's not really a center for anything other than, kind of the oil and gas business. So music here and the arts are always a kind of play second fiddle to everything else that happens here. But for me, because my father traveled a lot, he was exposed to a lot of different music. He was a merchant marine for a long time, and he would experience all these other cultures and all of these other people that would introduce him to country music and things like that he really didn't get into when he was growing up in the UK. And then from that, and he was very passionate about listening to music, but was not a musician. So I kind of grew up in a house where there was a lot of music played, but there weren't a lot of instruments around. Until my older brother and sister had guitars and really got into playing. And I was quite a bit younger than them. I'm 8 years younger than my brother and 11 years younger than my sister. And I would sort of borrow their guitars when they weren't looking and try and learn how to play it. And it's one of those things that I absolutely fell in love with the sound of it and playing it. And it came quite naturally to me. I was quite fortunate that way. And, with a father that traveled a lot and not a lot of extended family around me, because we were the only Broom family living in Canada or abroad at the time. It was kind of lonely growing up, and music and playing the guitar seemed to really fill a gap that I wasn't getting from having a lot of family around or being a super social or a really outgoing kid. I I was quite shy and kind of a nerd. But music just became this real comfort for me. And it was something that made me feel like I was connected to something a little bigger than my immediate sort of surroundings.
When you first picked up guitar, what kind of music were you playing? Were you playing music by other artists you've heard on radio, that you've bought their records at the time? Or were you kind of writing your own material and playing that? How did it kind of work for you during that kind of early time of kind of learning the six string and getting to kind of, you know, learn it and play it and become accustomed to it?
It was a bit of both, you know. My older brother and sister liked listening to music quite a bit, and so I would hear, you know, in the 70s, a lot of the classic rock stuff, you know, from Led Zeppelin to Jimi Hendrix to Steely Dan to Black Sabbath to all this kind of stuff. And I had a very good ear when I was a kid, and it was quite easy for me to learn songs just by listening to them. And that made it all the more inspiring that I could hear something I really liked and then be able to play it on a guitar. But also, when I was young, I really got into just making up songs, I guess, when you're younger, because I started playing when I was 6, and then really got into it for a couple of years, took some lessons, and then sort of the lesson part of playing the guitar turned me off from it. So I actually put it away for a couple of years, and I played drums because it was a lot more fun to hit stuff sometimes when you're, you know, 11 or 12. And then when I was in what we call junior high school here, when I was 13 or 14, I had some friends that were putting a band together that were musicians, and they already had a drummer. So I pulled the guitar out again. And that's when I sort of rediscovered how much I loved it. And I really haven't put it down since. It's been, you know, 36 years of toiling away on the thing. But yeah, it was really a combination of learning other songs, you know, from you know, Black Sabbath songs to B-52's songs to you know, like a lot of kind of British punk stuff. When I was growing up, we listened to a lot of that in the house, and you know, some of that stuff, like, it wasn't too difficult to play a Sex Pistols song, you know, when you're quite young, and it's so satisfying though, because there's so much energy in it and so much intent, and at a younger age that felt really great to me and felt really comfortable. But I always did kind of write my own stuff, and I would have a ghetto blaster, like a cassette deck with speakers in it that had 2 cassette decks on it. And I figured out a way where I could play the guitar and mic it into one cassette. And then I could flip that into the other deck, play it back, and actually overdub a second guitar part onto it. And I would sit in the basement for hours and just overdub and create music and create songs and or even just these kind of soundscapes and textural things, which is something that I've always really enjoyed about the guitar. You know, one deck would play at a different speed to the other, so I would always have to retune the guitar when I was overdubbing it. So it wasn't easy, but it was really quite gratifying to be able to record something and create something and have this, you know, and I wouldn't play it for anybody, but I would just have it there, and I'd listen back to it, and I'd be quite critical of myself and figure out, you know, how I could do it better or what worked and what didn't. But it was just that joy of discovery of playing the instrument and learning, you know, songs by other people, or learning, you know, some Jimi Hendrix licks and all that kind of stuff, and then trying to mangle them and put them into this other little creative outlet I had with this double cassette deck, you know, and it would just eat up all of my time.
You've spoken about your musical influences. You've told us kind of about stealing your siblings' guitars and instruments and learning the drums as well. But at kind of what stage did you kind of feel, after all the hours and hours of practice, kind of mimicking other players and also discovering your own sound, at what stage did you think, actually, I kind of want to do this as a job, do this as a career, and actually earn a living from this? When did that realization sink in?
I was quite young, I'd say I was 14. Because the band I was playing with a group of friends, we would play community center parties. And with our older brothers, sometimes they would rent out a community hall and we would be the entertainment. And all of our friends would come and they'd pay a couple dollars to come in and see the show. And our older brothers would make money on it and we would just be happy to play. But because I was kind of a lonely kid, and music for me was, as much as I enjoyed playing with my friends, it was really kind of a solitary pursuit. And I knew that I was taking it much more seriously than my other friends that were playing music at the time. And sometimes I would just be really into doing what I was doing. And when I, put my head up and to see what the reaction was of the people I might have been performing for, it was quite well received. And that, I was always kind of surprised by that. And then also inspired, because I thought, well, if all these people at this, little community center concert or in my school band kind of liked what I did, well, then maybe it's worth it. Maybe all this time I'm putting into it, there could be a future in it. And, living in Calgary, there's not really a lot of professional musicians, especially when I was growing up, that I could look up to or access. But I did manage to get a job teaching at a little music studio when I was in high school. And from there, I met some other musicians that were going to university and in the university jazz programs. And I really got into playing jazz because I thought I had to find some way to legitimize sort of the theoretical side of music. And I didn't really want to learn classical music because I felt it was just a little bit stiff and rigid for me. And jazz felt like something I could express myself, but also there was a lot of theory and there was a lot of knowledge required in order to do that effectively. And the more I did that, and the more I got some support from older musicians, meaning, in the university level when I was in high school and such, and my music teachers, people were really supportive, and they would always say, if you want to do this for a living, I think you could. And really, that's all I needed to hear, because I can be quite stubborn and tenacious, and because I enjoyed playing so much, I was determined to find a way to make it work and find a way to make it a life and not just something I did on the weekends or at night, when I wasn't at work. I wanted to make a go of it.
Tell us a bit about the music scene where you are from a performer's point of view, and also from a music fan's point of view in terms of the venues and what kind of music's being played where you are. And my secondary question is, what's made you to decide to kind of stay in the place where you were born and grew up and kind of not go elsewhere and kind of maybe go to America, for example?
Right. Well, the music scene here, I always say that the artists in Calgary that are doing something interesting are like flowers growing in the concrete. Like, we're not really meant to be here. But I think out of spite and out of just sheer tenacity, there is quite a healthy and determined music scene. And because it's not really a center for the music industry, that a lot of people tend to develop their own unique sound and their own unique way of doing things without being influenced a ton by external forces. So that's always been appealing to me, is that I can do a lot of different jobs here. I don't have to, move to New York and play guitar one way and only do that, and have to really be extremely focused in order to have a career. What suits my mindset better is that I can work on TV and film projects. I can produce records. I can play live shows. And there's enough diversity here and raw talent that after the years I spent touring on the road all over the world with Jann Arden, that I feel I kind of have this unique perspective to see really great raw talent here that maybe other people overlook. So, it is an odd place to live and to be an artist, but I think depending on how you shift your lens, it can be incredibly fulfilling and a lot more, there can be a lot more freedom for how you want to develop your career and what you want to do with your career in a smaller center like this. And as we all know, it's a lot easier now do things like Zoom things, or, you know, from my studio, I do sessions for people all over the world. And so my geographic location doesn't seem to have too much of a hindrance on things. But, you know, that being said, the music scene here, there's a lot of songwriters. It's prairie country. There's lots of country music. You know, Ian Tyson is one person who I've been fortunate enough to do quite a bit of work with over the last few years. And he's one of Canada's finest songwriters. He wrote Four Strong Winds. He wrote Someday Soon. But he's an authentic cowboy. He lives about an hour outside of Calgary on a cattle ranch, and he's in his 80s. And the fact that I'm living in Calgary and I get a chance to work with someone like that is one of the huge benefits of kind of being a bigger fish in a small pond.
Sure.
You know, so yeah, there's lots of positives. And the fact that when I was 23, I got a job playing with Jann Arden, and that's when her career started to take off. And we had a hit song in the States, and actually in Europe, it was used there was a song called Insensitive that was quite a big hit in Italy because they used it on a jeans commercial in the early 90s. So, you know, I was 23 and I was in a tour bus, and we went all over the world for 15 years. You know, we toured with Bob Dylan, we toured with Michael Bublé quite a bit, we toured with the Dixie Chicks, and then, you know, Jan's own career just kept going up and up and up. And so living in a place like Calgary wasn't really an issue. And I didn't have to move to America because I was there, you know, 5 or 6 times a year. You know, and we would make her records in the earlier days in Los Angeles. And yeah, so I felt like I had access to the world, but I could still come home to Calgary and not sort of have to go through all the competitiveness and the sort of, you know, of trying to build a career in a big center when there's a ton of competition. I just don't know if I'm really built for that. You know, I tend to like, you know, just kind of doing things at my own pace and learning things and developing things on my own. And it's a much more friendly environment to do so here. So
I want to talk next about Jann Arden. Obviously, you mentioned her just then, but talk about collaboration, because you spoke, I've seen you in previous interviews speaking about collaboration and how you like working and collaborating with other artists. And you've worked with so many, Jann Arden, the songwriter Martin Page, and some that I mentioned at the beginning. Obviously, it varies from artist to artist, but I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the creative process when you're working with other artists. How does it kind of work for you, or with other artists you've collaborated with? Do you prefer kind of a more rehearsed approach, or do you kind of like to improvise together? Kind of, what is kind of your preferred methods of working over the years?
Well, I think a lot of that depends on the job I'm doing with that collaborator. So, you know, as a guitar player, you know, I do a lot of session work and I play on a lot of records and TV shows and films. And that is a very, very much an improvised kind of in the moment job. So that kind of collaboration is quite exciting because of that, because there's not a lot of, sometimes there's not a lot of form to what you do, and you have to, what one big misconception with session musicians is that, you know, someone puts a sheet of music in front of you and you just execute something that someone else has written. And I know as a guitar player that 99.9% of the sessions I've done over my whole career have been without sheet music. It's been about creating your own parts and trying to take all of your knowledge and all of the things you've learned and find a way to channel it within the song that you're playing on, or you're with the artist you're collaborating with. So yeah, there's a big improvisational aspect to what I do. And sometimes even as a songwriter, coming in with a couple ideas, but then being open to seeing how the person you're collaborating with is going to receive those and what their mood is that day. It may send what I expect to be, you know, like a good song we're going to write that day with, if I have a really firm idea of what that is, it could send that out the window and we could just end up coming up with something in the spot because we feel inspired or compelled to do so. So it's a bit like trying to capture lightning in a bottle. And depending on the artist I'm working with and what the scenario is, it's really about it's just a very intense sort of collaborative interaction, an exchange of ideas that ultimately we hope something comes out of it that is better than either of our individual ideas, and that it's something that will excite us and surprise us. And I know I was fortunate enough to do a lot of writing with Jann, and that process for us was always a mystery, because we would write songs usually within an hour of being in a room together. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there was a seed of an idea and we would build that up, or sometimes we just came up with something on the spot. And a lot of times we would finish the structure and the lyrics and the chords and just, you know, the real skeleton and the meat and potatoes of the song was finished within a very short period of time, because there was always this kind of flurry of inspiration. And we just happened to have a chemistry where we gave each other permission to go down different avenues with those collaborations and to try different things. And ultimately, it was something that even to this day, we still find really exciting. We just finished working on a new record over the pandemic, and we're going to go finish it next month in Vancouver. And, you know, we recorded 10 songs that I have no idea where they came from. And that's really the joy and the mystery, and the thing that keeps you very humble is that sometimes the creative process, you don't feel you own it. It's one of those things that if you're lucky, it gets to kind of be channeled through you and you just get to express it. And hopefully the person you're working with is on that same wavelength, and you can create something that surprises everyone, including the audience. But most of all, it surprises us. And that's such a wonderful feeling. And really I think my favorite part about collaboration is just that sense of surprise and coming up with something that you have no idea where it came from, but you're open to it and you have the confidence and the tools to try and make something out of it. But yeah, it's still exhilarating to this day. It's great.
For people who watch and listen to this interview that aren't necessarily musicians, but they're music fanatics or collectors of music, how would you define the role as a session player? How would you define that role, and what kind of is a session musician's role when they're hired by an artist or by a band, for example? How does it kind of work?
Well, it's a lot more creative than I think people give it credit for. You know, I think session musicians sort of have this stigma attached to them that they're, you know, they're sort of these parrots that just sort of emulate other things or just execute something that someone else has written for them. But, you know, for example, yesterday I had a session where I was playing with a country artist from Manitoba, and it was 2 songs. And we basically heard a little demo tape that he recorded on his phone of him singing and playing acoustic guitar. So we basically write down the chord structure. And then what a session musician does is takes that raw material of just, you know, the words and the melody and the chords, and they impose all these different sort of textures and dynamics to it. So, you know, even though you may be hearing the song with just a guitar and a voice, when the drummer hears it, they have a sense of how the song should build and how it should ebb, and how that whole kind of roller coaster ride of a song should be structured and how it should feel. And then as a guitar player, usually I have to bring a few different guitars and I layer up different sounds. Sometimes it's acoustic guitars to give something a little bit of that sort of acoustic strummy, you know, half rhythmic, half melodic sort of content. And then with the electric guitar, it's coming up with maybe it's lead lines. And sometimes, well, more often than not, those aren't really dictated. Those are things that as a session musician, you have to actually write those parts. You have to make them up and come up with them in the moment. So yeah, it's quite a stressful job in the sense that you have a room full of people looking at you, and everyone's being paid, and the studio is expensive, and there's a lot of pressure on you to come up with something that will make the song better than it was before you stepped in the room. But it's a lot more of a creative job than I think people traditionally think of it as. You know, it's not like a symphony where it's all sheet music and it's all people executing that with some direction from a conductor and how they're going to interpret those notes. It's literally a sheet of paper with the names of chords on it. And then everything else you have to come up with. So what notes I'm going to choose out of that chord that I'm going to play, that's up to me. Or the producer will direct me and push me in a certain direction. but it's really about improvising and coming up with things on the spot. And then also thinking about how am I going to layer certain sounds together, and then playing with enough space that you leave room for you to do another, like an overdub of another guitar track. But it's like you're always thinking 3 or 4 steps beyond what you're actually doing in that moment. So it's quite an involved job, but really when it's great, you're just reacting to something and trusting your musical instincts to come up with something that is memorable or adds value to the song. And again, it's like, it's sort of like you're writing your own parts, and the exhilaration of coming up and creating these things is something that is that I find extremely satisfying and I really like. So
I wanted to talk now about the production side of things, your engineering side, your mixing skills as well. Does that kind of go hand in hand with being a musician? And what made you decide to kind of add that as an extra string to your bow? And I just also wanted to ask you on some of the kind of favorite projects you've worked on as an engineer and a producer.
Sure. It's the job of a producer is, I feel like it's a natural extension of being a musician for a long time, because eventually you want to be able to have a little more control and a little more input into the overall sound of things and the overall shape of things, and not just doing it from the guitar player's chair. So being in Calgary as well, when I was growing up, there weren't a lot of producers or engineers around, that I sort of felt some pressure to learn how to do it so I could, again, be a bit more self-contained. And, you know, the nice thing about that is we now live in a musical world where, you know, most musicians who are doing it professionally have some kind of engineering or recording skills and some kind of production skills. You know, if somebody sends me a song and they're in Los Angeles and they want me to play guitar on it, and they don't really give me any direction, then really I have to put on my producer hat and produce my own parts for this. And then the engineer hat gets put on because I have to place the microphones and set up all the gear and give them something of a professional quality that they can use in the final master of the song. So, you know, all those elements I think are becoming a lot more ubiquitous with a musical career now than they ever were. But because I lived in this kind of remote place in the world, and I wanted to just create music without having, you know, a huge amount of people around me doing it, it put a lot of pressure. I put a lot of pressure on myself to learn how to do those tasks. And the nice thing was working with someone like Jann and going to Los Angeles to work on records with her, I would be exposed to the best of the best. And I'm always good at asking too many questions and kind of annoying people around me by just being curious, you know, or being interested in what's going on and wanting to understand it. Not because I want to take that person's job or I want to boot them out and I want to produce a record. It's just because I see things that happen and I think that sounds great, or I love how that producer talked to that artist and got the best performance out of them. And I just want to learn. I just want to constantly be getting better at what I do. And the best way I found to do that is being around people that are better than me and asking lots of questions. But yeah, it's just nowadays it's a natural extension, you know, and working with someone like Jann as a producer is very collaborative. You know, it's not me sitting there telling her what to do. It's always a conversation. It's always like, well, we could try this, or what about this? And one of our sort of mottos when we're working together is that it takes 10 minutes to talk about an idea, but it takes 30 seconds to try it. So even if you do something and it doesn't end up being the right choice or the right part for the song, at least we want to investigate it, because sometimes going down a certain road can lead you somewhere else that can ultimately serve the song better. But if we don't try those things and we don't experiment and we don't kind of push the envelope, well, then we're just going to kind of stay in our comfort zone. And that's not always the best place to create from.
I like, sorry, I like the fact, I like the answer to the question where you say, you know, seeking advice from the best people. You can always learn from people who are more experienced than you are. And yeah, you can never ask too many questions, as they kind of say. My next question was in regard to the producing side. What attributes do you think makes a good producer, and any youngsters looking to get into the producing side of the music business, what would be your advice to them? I think one of your answers is probably, ask a lot of questions and speak to kind of the right people.
Right.
But just like to hear kind of what your thoughts are on the skills kind of required to make a really good music producer at this kind of time in the industry.
I think a big part of the job is it's putting the right people in the room. It's creating the right environment for the artist to thrive and for them to sort of perform and create at the best of their ability, or even beyond the best of their current ability. And a lot of that is about it's being very considerate of the artist's energy, and then putting the right energies of musicians in that place with them. And a lot of that just comes knowing how to make those choices. I think, I learned that being on the road for years, sitting in a tour bus for months on end with 10 other people. How do you live in that environment? How do you survive and not get in an argument on a daily basis? How do you respect everyone's space and be sensitive to what everyone is bringing to the table? And then for a lot of the years when I was working with Jann, I was a musical director as well. So it's a matter of, how do I cultivate the best out of all of these musicians on a daily basis when we go out and perform? And then all those skills that I learned on the road translated really well into the production world. And I remember, working with certain producers and how they would get the best out of me. And I always, tried to remember those situations, like working with our friend Martin Page. He would always kind of push me to do things that were a little bit different than what I was normally interested in doing. But sometimes when you play something and the producer's answer is, no, I don't want you to do that, I want you to do something completely different, I think there's two ways of looking at that scenario. As you can lead with your ego and you can say, well, that's how I play the guitar, and maybe you should hire someone else and I'm not the right guy for it. Or how I like to look at it is, there's an opportunity here for me to do something different. Or they're hearing my art and what I create through a lens that I'm not familiar with. So they're hearing different things in it that I'm not maybe even aware of. So working with producers that can have that kind of vision and can help steer a musician, and how I've been steered over the years, are all skills that I use every day when I'm working with artists or filmmakers or anything, any other creative person. So yeah, I think it's important to have really good people skills and to be really respectful and to leave your ego at the door, and to create an environment where people feel safe and comfortable to contribute ideas, whether they're good or not. But sometimes you have to work through things to find the heart of something. And I think it's a very humble job, but also you have to be able to make decisions from a confident place. And I think, being a producer, I would not have liked to have been a producer in my 20s or in my late teens, because I didn't have the confidence. And I don't think I had sort of the seasoning you need as a producer to look at a room full of people and creative people and figure out how to corral that energy into something exceptional. So it's a huge amount of people skills. It's a huge amount of making choices as far as where you're going to record, if that environment is something that you feel the artist will really thrive in, putting the right people in the room. And also my methods involve a lot of pre-production, where I like to work one-on-one with the artist before we get in the room with a band. Or, if it is a band, maybe just the key songwriters in the band. I really like working with them one-on-one to work on the song structures and the keys and the tempos and all these things, that when we get into the studio and we're being creative, there's a lot of decisions that have already been made. Therefore, structure creates confidence with people. It's like kids, right? They may complain about structure, but really it gives them a sense of comfort and it gives them a sense of safety. And I like to do the same approach when I'm working in the studio with people. It's, you come in and it's like, well, this is a song, this is a structure, this is how, and there's always room in the moment if we kind of get hit by lightning and something great happens, and we can't really deny the fact that somebody has a better idea than my idea or the artist's idea initially, to be foolish not to follow that. So it's a certain amount of openness, but also it's coming in with certain expectations and certain things that are that are already kind of determined, and therefore you create that structure for people to create in. And I think you can focus people's energy and focus people's creativity in a way that you get the end result that you hope for. I don't always know what it's going to sound like when I go in, but I know what it feels like. It's like when I hear a song I'm working on, there's just a point where subconsciously I just think, well, this sounds like a record, meaning that maybe we're really close to being done. Maybe we're in the end zone on this song. And there's times when I'm working on songs where I could be working on it for months and I'm like, it still doesn't feel like a record. And I can't really quantify what that is. I can't really tell you exactly what all those little things, all those boxes that gets ticked, what they are that makes me feel that way. But I just know that if I don't trust my gut, then I have no business doing that job, because it really is about creating musical instincts and trusting them and making confident decisions and respectful decisions in the moment and doing it quickly so you don't lose momentum, and that you don't have a bunch of people who have all this energy and want to create sitting around waiting for you to do something you could have done before you showed up at the studio. So yeah, it's a lot of preparation. I think younger producers sometimes don't understand that. And I know sometimes when I work with younger producers that it's pretty evident within the first 5 minutes or so how much they're leaning on the musicians to come up with things that I feel should be a producer's choice. It's a very tenuous sort of relationship. But I think any producer as well, it's important to have mentors that are younger than you. It's important to listen to people in their 20s who are starting out, because they have a whole different set of tools. They've been growing up with a different set of tools, and they know how to use things, like Pro Tools or computer audio stuff. They probably know how to use it better than I do. So I'm always open to learning from younger producers as well. But the people side of it, and the cultivating the talent and the creativity and hosting that environment and space for people to ultimately create something that the listener will hopefully get goosebumps when they hear. I think that takes a lot of years of just dealing with people and understanding the creative mindset and how to respectfully push people to do something that's, to the best or beyond the best of their ability.
Going to talk about change now, because obviously most industries go through change over time. It could be led by technology, could be economic, could be political factors. But obviously in the music industry, in your 30 years working within it, you've seen massive change over that course of time. Kind of wanted to ask you which changes you've embraced the most. And I also wanted to come on to this digital analog debate. What's your take on kind of the digital music revolution compared to the analog age of old?
Well, the joy of recording with analog equipment, I think is in the level of commitment you have to making decisions. Like, digital technology is great because it gives you infinite options. Like, I can record something and I can manipulate the pitch, I can manipulate the time, I can chop little bits up and create new things from all those little bits. So really it's the music becomes data that you can manipulate in the computer world. And that is great. Like, it's lovely to have that option. And then sometimes it really sucks to have that option, because having too many options can create a different type of anxiety from not having enough options, right? And the analog world makes you can't edit things as easily. You can't fix things as easily. So it makes you perform better. It makes you be more mindful and not quite so brave sometimes with how you come up with parts and ideas, knowing that when it goes onto a tape machine, it's the amount of stuff you can do to it afterwards is limited. But with computers, you can just literally barf out 1,000 ideas and then edit them later. So, there's positives and negatives to all of that. I think people romanticize analog recording, not realizing that it's actually kind of a pain to work in, and the thing you notice immediately, like I haven't worked on a tape machine for a few years now, but I remember one of the last times was with a younger band, and they would want to, sing their part. So they'd go in and they'd sing a take, and they'd be, okay, I want to do another take. And you'd be, okay. And they'd have to sit and wait for you to rewind the tape. And that became so frustrating for them because they were like, well, I have this energy, I want to sing it right now. And it's like, well, you wanted to record on a tape machine. And the reality is you have to wait for it to rewind to the start in order for you to sing it again. Whereas on digital, it's like, it's immediate. You could just have someone go in and sing a very specific note. And if they screw it up, you can redo it a million times. And then you never lose the original one. And with analog here, it's much more about commitment. When you edit something or you re-record something, you lose the part that was there before. There's no undo button on a tape machine, right? So as romantic as it sounds, sometimes those limitations will make a band perform better and will give it a different sort of intensity. But sometimes people just they're not used to working with that level of commitment. And then it ends up becoming more of a detriment to the project than an asset.
You've worked across so many different musical areas, and we've touched on most of them tonight, from being a session musician, obviously playing guitar, drums, songwriting, live performance, mixing and producing. Do you have a favorite kind of musical area you enjoy working in the most? And if so, why?
It varies. I will say if I had to choose one, it would probably be just playing guitar, because that is my first love. And still it's something that I feel I have a voice with the guitar, and I feel like it's a way of expressing myself that I can't really articulate with words or anything else. And it's something I've grown up doing. It's been, since I was young, it's been a way of expressing myself that I couldn't do otherwise. And I think that sort of kept me grounded and kept me fairly sane in a job that isn't very sane, in a world that is in flux all the time. And, it's such, to pick up a guitar and play, it still feels as exhilarating as when I first picked it up. And when I would get lost in it when I was 13 or 14, I still get that same feeling now. And I'm extremely grateful for that. The other jobs it's more my curiosity and my interest that has fueled my sort of exploration into those different sides of things. Or it's just been like, I've come up with an idea, I want to write a song about it, but I'm not a singer. So I will work with a singer and collaborate and see if my musical ideas will light a fire in them that will create some melodic and some lyrical ideas. So it's been about expression, really. Has been the main joy, is just being able to express it and share that, and ultimately try and put some music back into that sort of body of work that we've all grown up listening to and been inspired by. I would just love to be able to put some of my own music back into that river of ideas and creativity that I draw from every day, that is the legacy of artists that have come before us, and all the records that we consume, and all the times music has made me get through a difficult time or a difficult day. I would just love to be able to create something that somebody somewhere can get that same sense of connection and joy and an emotional sort of release that I've always gotten from listening to music. So yeah, it's just trying to contribute back into that world, right?
Going to move on now to one of the most iconic and successful British bands from obviously the late 70s and 1980s, Queen, and such a phenomenal frontman with Freddie Mercury. But I wanted to ask you how you got the gig as musical director for the We Will Rock You Queen musical. How did that gig come about? And also just ask you, were you kind of a fan of the band before kind of working on the project?
Yeah, one of my first real pivotal musical experiences when I was a kid, I was 6. And being in Canada, I used to love to play hockey. But I was a goalie when I was a kid as well. And I had this injury where I had a hernia and I couldn't play hockey for I think it was 3 or 4 months. And as a 6-year-old kid, that was like, well, that really sucks. and my sister had a 45 of We Are the Champions. And I remember hearing it and I was feeling really sad. And this song just hit me in this emotional place that even as a 6-year-old, I didn't really know I had. And all that sadness I felt was sort of released listening to that music. And it was one of the first times I really connected with music, was hearing a Queen song, just coincidentally. And, you know, it's such a great anthemic, you know, piece of music. But as a 6-year-old kid where everything seemed so dramatic, it was just like this, I just want to play hockey again. And I want to get back into that. And I can't, but this song makes me feel like it's okay and I'll get through it. And so when I got the job to do this, and it was because there's a local company in Calgary called Jann Arden Productions that basically bought the license for the theater show, and we're going to do a 6-month run in North America putting the show together. So I'm not a musical theater person. Like, to be totally honest, I don't consume musical theater. I don't really enjoy it. I don't really enjoy how people sing musical theater. I find it a little bit too affected, and it's just not my thing. It's not to my taste. But when I was approached about doing this job, the reason I said yes was because the musical it's Queen's music. And I think out of respect for that music, it can't be treated like a theater show. So I hired musicians who memorized all the music before they showed up for the first rehearsal, because they weren't people that could read music very well, but they were band people. They were people that were playing in rock and metal bands. I mean, the lead guitar player we had is a guy named Sam Colson, and he played with that band Asia for a number of years, which is a bunch of people from Yes and all that. And because Sam's he's a prodigious guitar player from Birmingham, actually, but he's been living in Calgary for a number of years. But, you know, I thought the only reason I would have a right to do this job of being a musical director on a theater show was that I could bring a different sort of interpretation of the music, meaning I didn't want people just reading it. And I chose musicians that I thought had the certain characteristics of each member of Queen. So the lead guitar player was a very melodic guitar player. He sort of he has this way of phrasing things that is just naturally similar to how Brian May does it, because Brian May's been a big influence on him as well. And Sam, the guitar player, is such a disciplined player that he could learn something very exact and execute it the same every night with the same intensity. So it wasn't a guy who was just sitting there reading notes. It was someone who grew up on this music and got to play it in an arena every night and got to sort of be Brian May. And, you know, the drummer, we had a fellow named Chad Melchert, who, to me, I do a lot of session work with him. And his feel was very similar to how Roger Taylor plays, to my sensibility. And then the bass player I hired was a woman named Lisa Jacobs, who, when you look into the history of Queen, John Deacon sort of brought that funk side of things and that more urban side of things to the band. And Lisa naturally plays that way. She grew up playing in funk and blues bands. And her main instrument is the same instrument that John Deacon would play. So it was just like, well, I want these people to have the essence of what each individual in Queen brought to that table that made them sound like such a unique band. And all great bands, I think, are just distinct personalities that come together and do something that surprises everyone in the room, you know? And I tried to do that by casting the band in the same way, and the singers. I wanted to get people that weren't traditionally musical theater people, but people who I thought could act and could dance, but also could front a rock band. Like, I wanted people that sang rock and roll, that didn't overly articulate every word and didn't kind of do that very enunciated sort of musical theater way of delivering things. I wanted someone who could get in front of a loud guitar and sing and give that intensity. And I think because of that, because we had a fairly modest budget to put the show on production wise, that I think the musical side of it was very strong, and everyone was really invested in sort of the legacy of Queen and really wanted to get into the idiosyncrasies of it. And we were fortunate enough to work with a guy named Stuart Morley, who was a musical director for a number of the British productions. And he came over and kind of was our music supervisor. But again, he works directly with Brian May and Roger Taylor in Queen for a lot of different things, because Stewart is a very gifted orchestrator and conductor and arranger, and a stellar musician too. But with all of his sort of wealth of ideas and experience, we got to kind of be the snotty rock band from Canada that got to play that music. And I thought that was a neat way of looking at the musical element in the show, was to try and make sure that it sounded like a band. It didn't sound like a group of musicians trying to mimic someone else, because everyone naturally played their instrument in the way that I've interpreted the people in Queen, how they would play their instrument and how they would, what they would contribute musically to the songs and such. So yeah, it was fun. And it was something that was definitely out of my comfort zone. And it was terrifying, but it's great to say yes to things that scare you and dive in sometimes head first and just accept that there's a steep learning curve and that you're determined to learn how to navigate it and ultimately bring my sensibility to that job. And I did quite well. It was a 6-month tour. And then I think the last date was like February 29th of 2020, right before, the world shut down. But yeah, it was great. It was a great experience. It was great to get inside that music and learn it from almost a forensic sort of point of view. And just to really appreciate and understand what a unique group of individuals Queen is, and what they ultimately culminated in, made them sound like no one else,
Going to put you on the spot a bit here, but
sure.
It must be frustrating for artists when they're kind of pigeonholed, and we do categorize music. And if you take any artist, like for instance, Charlie Parker, we say jazz, Chuck Berry, we say is a 1950s rock and roll guitarist. But deep down, when you're playing the guitar instrument, would you say there's a particular style that you've enjoyed playing the most? And deep down, that's the kind of style that kind of flows through your veins, and you think, oh, deep down I love playing rock, or I love really playing kind of country picking? What kind of style kind of turns you on creatively the most, would you say?
I really like the textural side of playing guitar, meaning I like coming up with different sounds. I like doing things that maybe have a certain ambience to them. I really like creating moods with the guitar. And that's something I've done since I was a kid, when I had that tape deck and I would just try and overdub different sounds and layer things to create just a sort of wall of sound. And, I grew up playing blues. I still do it now. I have a group of friends and we get together and play these 3-hour marathon blues gigs in sweaty little clubs. And it's great. It gets my fingers flowing. It gets me really engaged in the moment. It keeps my brain and creativity pretty clear, because you got to be really in the moment and do all that. And I love playing blues and that kind of music as well. But I think, it's the more textural side of playing guitar. It's unique sounds. It's coming up with simple parts that complement a song that maybe you don't even realize they're happening. But if you take them away, you notice there's a big gap there that is no longer being filled. And so, yeah, as an accompanist and someone who plays behind singers and adds my voice to that mix with different sounds and different textures and different little melodies I run underneath. That's my favorite way to play, playing a really good song and coming up with and constructing parts for that. That's always been really satisfying for me.
During our conversation, you mentioned about touring for many years around the world with Jann Arden and some of the big names that you've met on the road, such as Bob Dylan, and you mentioned some other names as well. But what are your thoughts on touring? Did you like it? And I also wanted to ask you any sort of memorable places you've performed, or particular moments that kind of you'll always look back on and think, oh, I just really relish that moment in my life and career.
Touring is great. I think it's a younger person's game, because you don't sleep for years. Like, sleeping on a tour bus is very difficult. And the thing that I always struggled with was the downtime. So if, your typical day is maybe you'll show up at the wherever you're playing, and you will do a sound check, and you will make sure everything works and that all the sound is right and your instruments are working. And maybe that'll happen at 4 o'clock, and then your show is at 8 o'clock. And then what do you do for those little 3 to 4 hour gaps? And touring is like this just constantly like never ending series of 3 to 4 hour periods of time where you can't really do anything, but you have to do something. And for me, that just became too much. I felt like I was wasting a lot of time, and being tired on the road is just, it's just the nature of it. You don't get a lot of sleep. You're always traveling. You're always sleeping in different hotels or in a bus, and all these ways where you don't feel well rested frankly for years. And then when you have these little windows and you don't feel productive or super motivated to do something, and you feel like you're wasting all this time, that's when I decided I needed to get off the road. When that was sort of my takeaway from, playing in Germany, opening up for Michael Bublé for a month, was I really got sick of having days off. I really got sick of time off. And that just told me someone else has to do this job for a while, because I'm not appreciating it the way I need to. But it's great, as far as specific venues and stuff, like playing places like Radio City Music Hall, or like playing in hockey arenas all over the world is pretty fun. Those bigger venues are pretty great. The Sydney Opera House was a place that we did a few shows at, and that was, really great. But the thing that I really remember most, it's when you have a really good performance and you're feeling there's that really great energy exchange with the audience. You can finish a song and the last note sort of echoes off, and there's a couple seconds of silence, because you know that everyone in the audience is listening as intently to what you're doing as you are. And that little moment of silence, whenever we would have that on a gig, that was the most gratifying feeling, because you just felt like everyone was focused on the same thing. And there was that great energy exchange, because playing live really is that. You're putting all this energy out there, and then you're getting it back from the audience. They're being inspired by it, they're clapping, they're reacting to what you're doing. But that energy exchange just becomes this sort of exponential exchange of energy that gets bigger and bigger and better and better. And at the end of a gig, it's so exhilarating to just feel like you've connected with people so much. And my way of really feeling that happened was that little moment of silence before people started clapping at the end of a song. And that's such a great gift to be able to experience that. Or, when you're up there and you're playing and you're like, this sounds really good, but I don't feel like I own it, right? Like it just feels like the music is channeling through you. And some days when I'm playing my best on a gig, I could be thinking about my laundry rather than thinking about the music, because you're just so connected to it. And it's such a part of you that it's not even conscious thought that is dictating what you're doing. It is strictly being in the moment and taking all those years of musical instincts and experience and just letting the music flow through you. And it's a meditative state. It's, it's probably not dissimilar to speaking in tongues in a church or something, where you really lose yourself and you are just expressing something. And I find that an incredibly gratifying and incredibly humbling experience when that happens. But I try to have it happen every time I play. That's kind of my goal, is to get in that sort of zone, as they call it. But it's a very special place to be able to exist, and to consistently visit it. Is, and I can think about specific shows where that happened, and I don't necessarily remember where they are or who we were playing for, but I remember that feeling. And that's something that I've always that's been my favorite takeaway from all those years of touring.
Before we come on to the final set of questions, which I always enjoy, we ask all guests these, and we do get some interesting answers. Want to ask you what current projects you're working on, and then the other question, secondary question to that, was we hear so much about established artists that we've spoken about in the interview, but of young musicians you've worked with, perhaps ones we've not heard of. Which ones would you kind of recommend that you've enjoyed working with and we should listen to? And if they're touring in our areas, we should go and see. Who are your picks and people to kind of look out for in the music industry?
Right. Yeah, there's a young fella up here named Kyle McCurney who I did a record with, and I think he's probably the most talented musician I've ever worked with. And I hired him actually to be the second guitar player on the Queen tour. But he could sing as well as anyone in the cast. He could play guitar as well as, you know, our lead guitar player. Just he did it. He had a different voice with it. But he's an incredible writer. He's a really authentic person. And we did kind of a more rootsy country project with him because he grew up in a small town in northern British Columbia. And that's his history, is playing folk music around a campfire. That's how he grew up. So after years of him kind of pursuing sort of pop bands and stuff like that, he decided he was going to do a more rootsy and a simpler and more country-ish record. And we collaborated on that. And I just think he's poised to be able to do anything he wants musically. And I don't know if I've met many people that are that grounded and that talented at his age that have that much potential. So I'm a big fan of his. As far as other projects, you know, like Jann Arden and I have a new record that we're just finishing up. I was fortunate enough to do a record for an iconic kind of punk rock artist out here named Art Bergman. And that's how we worked with Wayne Kramer from the MC5, was he guested on one of the songs playing guitar. But that record was all done during the pandemic. And it was, you know, people recorded stuff in different places, and we kind of coalesced everything here at my little studio. And so that's something I'm quite proud of. And because Art, it really is an exceptional writer. He's very political. He just received the Order of Canada, which is sort of our equivalent of being knighted. But he is a punk rock guy. So it was one of those things that everyone thought it was quite interesting that he got chosen with that honor. But yeah, right now it's producing some younger artists. There's a lot of ambient music I've been writing, and I'm in the process of doing my own kind of record of that. I did some playing on Martin Page's new record. I've been collaborating a bit with a producer named Reese Fulber, who has a group called Conjure One. And it's more of a dance kind of ambient sort of music project. And I've been doing some guitar tracks for him, and that's been really, really enjoyable. And a lot of TV and film stuff. You know, Jann Arden, who I refer to quite often because she is a big part of my career. She has a TV series that we just finished our third season, and I'm the composer on that. So I just finished writing all the music for that show. And yeah, and I'm working on another television show called Joe Pickett. That's Paramount Pictures thing up here. And I'm actually producing a few songs for it that feature some of the actors from the show, which again is something quite different, but it's been really great. And I've got to work with some incredible people, and there's a really nice creative energy in that camp. And yeah, so it's just been a whole, you know, my day-to-day is really neat because I'll come to the studio every day. I rarely have time off, but some days I'm mixing score. Like there's a TV show, a BBC show called Fireman Sam, right? Yeah. It's a kids program. Yeah.
Well, my kids watch it all the time.
Yeah. So a good friend of mine named Mike Shields, who I've been collaborating with for about 30 years, who's a film and TV composer, he does the music for this current season of it. And I've been mixing all the score for him. So once a week we get together and I mix an episode of like all the score and the music for Fireman Sam. And that is really fun because I don't understand how they write music for cartoons. It's not songs. It's not anything I'm used to doing. And I learn a lot and I get a lot of enjoyment doing that. So yeah, there's a lot of different projects, and every day it's something different. And because of that, I feel like I don't really burn myself out, because some days I'm playing guitar all day. Some days I'm collaborating with an artist on a production all day. Some days I'm mixing music for TV or film or a record. And just to have that diversity of work has been really, really gratifying, and it keeps me motivated to want to learn a lot more. And they all inform one another. I'll take things I learned from mixing film score and I'll use it on a record, and all of a sudden that gives me a different edge in that world. And then, you know, producing records got me a couple jobs working on this just Joe Pickett TV show, because he needed someone who could produce music for it and work with actors and stuff. And that's like, I do that too. So yeah, they all inform one another. But yeah, every day is a different sort of hill to climb, and I really enjoy that.
Russell Broom, we come down to the final set of questions. We ask all the guests all, I think it's 15 so far that we've interviewed, all the same questions. They're kind of just quick fire questions just to find out things you like the most, places you've been to that are your favorites. So here we go. Number one, what's your favorite pastime?
I love to cook. I really love cooking. And my wife and I, we have a restaurant as well because she's in the restaurant business. And the best times we have are Saturday afternoons where we open a bottle of wine and we just create something and we cook for hours. And it's, yeah. So I love cooking. And touring for so many years, I got exposed to great food, you know, like contrary to what people think, you know, working with an artist like Jann, we would spend a lot of time going to good restaurants and really, we kind of all became sort of food fanatics on the road. And that translates to when I came home, I really got into cooking. So yeah, I love that.
The cinema next. What is your favorite movie and why?
It's kind of an odd one, but there's a David Mamet film called Glengarry Glen Ross.
It's a great film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's the subtle interactions of those actors and the dialogue and it's just, I watch it every couple of years. I've probably seen it 16, 17 times. I really love that film. I love the energy of it. I mean, Jack Lemmon is incredible in it. Al Pacino is incredible in it. But it's such an incredible character study. And I love that kind of stuff. I love characters. I love, you know, I'm lucky enough to work with a lot of unique individuals. And I just love that film because it explores some of those just like some awful people. But it's great. It's a great character study. Yeah, that's definitely my favorite. It has been for a long time.
Yeah, I love that film, and I agree with you. I think it's one of Jack Lemmon's finer sort of later performances.
Totally.
Your favorite novelist next?
Henry Miller was someone that I always loved, and the thing that really drew me to him was he was the first writer I discovered that the words seemed to leap off the page. And I would get so energized reading things, even, you know, some of his short essay books like Black Spring or Air Conditioned Nightmare, you know, where it's sort of his editorials on North American life and stuff, or life in Europe. I just got so much energy and so much just inspiration from the energy that came out of that. So yeah, he's always been a big influence, and I still revisit a lot of those books, and just even reading a few chapters here and there and just reminding me that, you know, this incredibly passionate human created this, put all these words together, and it had an impact on me from 15 years old to now. So yeah, he's great.
Career choices now, but if you could have done a different profession, what would it have been?
I honestly don't know. This is really the only job I've ever had, much to the, like, it's odd. It's odd to be 50 years old and have been a musician since I was, you know, professional musician since I was 18. You know, when I sometimes do workshops and stuff at universities, and I teach a bit, and I do like that. I do like, it feels like another type of energy exchange, sort of like performing. So I guess if I had to choose something, I would probably want to teach. Yeah.
If I was asked that question, I think I would have chosen musician. I'd love to be in your shoes.
Oh, yeah. Don't do that.
I haven't got the talent for it. Trust me. Yeah. Next one. Who in life has been your greatest inspiration?
You know, I don't. I'm not really someone who worships a lot of things and people. So, that's a difficult question. I think it's an ever moving target. I mean, my mother is someone that I've been close to for a very long time. My father passed away when I was quite young. So my mother and I have a really strong bond, and she's just a really unique and joyful person. So she's always been a source of inspiration, but I'm not a very reverential person, to be honest. And that's not out of disrespect for people. I'm just not kind of wired that way. I'd rather be I'd just rather be stuck in with everything and be a part of it all, and not try and separate myself from the people that I admire, you know? So.
Next one, do you read a newspaper? And if so, which one?
I have the New York Times on my iPad, and I look at that. I'm also addicted to the crossword side of it, but I do like it. I tend to read, you know, it's tough with newspapers these days because there's so much information online, and you turn on your phone and there's 1,000 different news outlets you can get information from. But I do like the New York Times. It's great recipes. I really like New York as a city. So yeah, that's definitely something that I look at every day.
Back to one of your favorite things that you mentioned earlier is food. But what is your favorite food?
Oh my gosh. You know, my wife and I have this conversation all the time. Like, if we could only eat one thing for the rest of our lives, what would it be? And we always say sushi. A good sushi is something that I think is hard to beat. Plus, after you eat a ton of it, you don't feel awful after, you know. It's a nice way to eat. But yeah, good sushi is hard to beat for me.
Who would you say, if you could choose one, is your favorite cultural icon?
Oh my goodness. Cultural icon.
We could skip that one if you want.
Yeah, you know what? I have absolutely no idea. I apologize. I did,
no
you know, I
problem.
obviously, yeah, I read all these, but I'm like, I don't know if I have a cultural icon that again, like the biggest inspiration. Sometimes I don't think of people that way. So
I always love asking this one. I love hearing the answer. What's your favorite curse word?
Shitballs.
Like it.
Yeah, it's kind of it has enough edge to it that people know I'm serious when I say it, but there's enough levity that it's not the end of the world.
What's your favorite place or holiday destination?
Right now it's London. My wife is from London, so every time we go, like, I like vacationing in urban centers. I like to go to museums and go to restaurants and experience, you know, a city rather than going to a beach, just hanging out. But that being said, the two places my wife and I go quite often, or had gone to quite often, have been London in the UK and Palm Springs, because it's very serene. The desert is very unique. And I really like the energy down there and the architecture. And it's just a really interesting place. So yeah, I'd say London and Palm Springs, which are two complete polar opposites, but they're my favorites right now.
What would you say is your greatest achievement to date?
That I'm still doing what I do, and that I'm still interested, and I'm not jaded or bitter or overly frustrated with how my career has gone. You know, I'm not the most successful producer or musician in the world, but I'm not the most unsuccessful, you know? And I really like that, because I work mostly behind the scenes and I'm not an artist in the sense that, you know, my face is on the front of a record or I'm on TV doing it, that the freedom that my career has given me and the ability to explore different things and try different things, I feel very fortunate to have such a diverse career and to be, I guess, successful in a lot of different avenues of it. You know, as a producer, as a musician, as a songwriter, as a composer, as an engineer. I'm very lucky that way. So I think that, yeah, my greatest achievement is still being interested and hungry and still wanting to do this every day.
And the final one, how do you wish to be remembered, Russell Broom?
That I was not an asshole. I like to be remembered as someone who supported the people I worked with, and that I hopefully inspired them and brought something positive to the listener that consumes the music I make, to the people I collaborate with. I just hope I've made their lives easier and better rather than making them difficult. It'd be nice to be remembered to be a positive influence on them and not a negative one.
I think that's a really nice note to end on. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed the last hour, your insight into your career, your absolute passion for music. It's been a pleasure. I've really, really enjoyed it. Thanks for your time. And how do we find out more about Russell Broom music?
Go to russellbroom.com. Pretty simple. 2 S's, 2 L's, and Broom, just like the thing from Mary Poppins, I guess. But yeah, I appreciate this very much. I
Thank
love
you.
doing these kind of things because it makes me have to articulate things that I just take for granted and don't think about. So thanks for the opportunity to speak with you, and I really appreciate the questions and everything, and I'm honored to be a part of what you do. So thank you.
Oh, thank you kindly. And I wish you all the best with future musical projects, the touring, if that happens again, or as and when you do it. And thanks for taking part and being a guest on Your Take.
Thank you very much. Take care and stay safe.